Today is the 17th of July, 2012. We are in Charlton, New York. My name is Wayne Clark. I'm with the New York State Military Museum in Saratoga Springs, New York. Sir, for the record, would you please state your full name and date and place of birth, please?
I'm Howard Chester Bowman, born the 2nd of April 1923 in what is now Gdansk, Poland. My father was American Vice Consul there at the time.
I see. Did you attend school there at all?
No, I didn't. I left as a young child, moved to various places around the world.
Oh, I see. Okay. And did you, I assume you graduated from a high school along the way?
Yes, I could begin by saying that the war hit me quite early. I was living in Glasgow, Scotland in 1939 when the war began. My father was American Consul in Glasgow, and I was about to start my last year of high school in Glasgow. And the war began on the 3rd of September 1939, and that night the liner Athenia was torpedoed outside of Glasgow out in the Clyde estuary by a German U-boat, and it was filled with American tourists fleeing Europe to get back to the States. And they were all brought back to Glasgow, and it was the job of the consulate to get them clothing, food, accommodations, documentation. Some of them appeared in their pajamas and the night clothes. And so I was drafted as an unpaid clerk to help out at the consulate, and that was my first introduction to the war. I spent about 2 weeks doing that, and then school began, and I went back to school, and my father a couple of days later said, why don't you come down to the consulate and have lunch with me and the son of the American ambassador who came up to help out. And I said, no, I'm just too busy with my schoolwork, and so that's how I missed meeting John F. Kennedy.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. So we stayed on in Glasgow in 1940, 41. The city was bombed. We were lightly hit. One time I came up from the cellar to our apartment during an air raid, and I looked at the bombing the shipyards and workers' tenements along the Clyde, and suddenly I saw a parachute come down with something that looked like an ash can at the bottom. That was a landmine. In addition to bombs, they sometimes brought down landmines which exploded above the ground for their blast effect. I saw that, and I flattened myself on the floor, and the window went out right over my head and embedded itself in the other wall. So that was my first narrow escape in the war. And then in January 1942, my father was transferred back to the States, and we proceeded to London, saw the damage there, and then we took a train to Bristol, England, and got aboard a Dutch KLM airliner, which took us to Lisbon, Portugal. And it was only half filled with seats, the rest was filled with spare fuel tanks. To get it, we had to go way out over the Atlantic and make a wide berth around France and approach Portugal from the west to avoid German patrols. We flew at about 100 feet. It was my first airplane ride. It was the bumpiest I've ever experienced since. A couple of flights later, the great British actor Leslie Howard was on the flight, and his plane was shot down.
Oh, yes.
So we had an escape there. We got to Lisbon and spent about 2 weeks waiting to get on the Pan Am Clipper, these old flying boats. We kept being bumped by more important passengers. Then we flew down to, from Lisbon, we took off from the Tagus River and flew to Portuguese Guinea in West Africa, spent a night there. We were supposed to leave the next morning, but the plane had to go out looking for survivors of a torpedoed ship in the South Atlantic. Came back, so we spent another night there, and then we flew across the equator to Natal, Brazil, and had breakfast there. We flew to Belém, Brazil, had lunch there. Spent a night in Trinidad, and then we got to Bermuda. We spent a night in Bermuda. None of these cross transatlantic flights. It took a long time. And in Bermuda, it was buzzing with activity. It was a great base for hunting German U-boats, full of British and American ships and airplanes going on patrol for the U-boats. And then the next day we flew to New York and landed in Long Island Sound and took a taxi to the city, and we drove by the docks along the Hudson. There we saw the liner Normandy lying on its side.
Oh, really? Wow.
It caught fire a couple of days before, and it was a total loss. It was a sad sight to see this great ship
Sure.
lying in the water there. So then I went to Swarthmore College. I spent most of the year at college, and then in November 1942 I enlisted in the U.S. Army.
Okay, let me just go back a little bit.
Sure.
You have that one picture in the Scottish uniform. You
Oh, yes.
mentioned ROTC.
Yes, I was at, after finishing school, I went to the University of Glasgow, and I was in the ROTC at school, and this was the uniform of the Highland Light Infantry, and we were trained by cadre of the Highland Light Infantry.
Now, how long were you there for?
I was there for 2 years with in the ROTC, and I passed, and I could have applied for a commission, but I would have, at that time, lost my American citizenship.
I see.
My father and I agreed that it was not a good idea, so I didn't do that. I went back to the States.
Okay, so you're back in the States.
Yeah, and I just had 3 semesters of college. I had 3 semesters at the University of Glasgow before coming to the States, and then a couple of semesters at Swarthmore College, and I decided to enlist because the draft was going to get me anyway, and I heard that if you enlisted, you got privileges. You got to pick your branch of service and so on.
So you enlisted in the Army?
Yeah, this was completely false information. There was no particular benefit. But I tried to enlist in the Navy, and they refused me because I had a heart murmur.
Oh, I see.
And I tried to enlist in the Marines, and I was too puny. But the Army didn't care, so they took me. And I went to the processing center at New Cumberland, Pennsylvania, and I was interviewed. And the young man who interviewed me said, "You went to the University of Glasgow, didn't you?" And I said, "Yeah." They have a good medical school, don't they? I said, "Yes, but I studied economics." "But they do have a good medical school?" And I said, "Yes, but I studied economics." Well, the next morning I found I was assigned to medical basic training at Camp Pickett, Virginia. And I was trained as a medic.
Now, what was your basic training like?
It was strenuous because when the infantry is resting, you go up and down the line, treat for heat exhaustion and sore feet and so on. So marching, 16-mile forced marches and 20-mile marches, and a lot of that, carrying pretty heavy packs with medical equipment.
So that medical basic training, it was, as far as being trained as a medic, was it like an on-the-job type training program?
Yes, theoretically most, because we didn't treat any actual injured people.
I see.
So, and then we were going to go on from that to more advanced training. But before I was assigned anywhere else, I was told to take an examination at a certain place. And I said, "Sergeant, what's this exam about?" And the sergeant said, "Shut up, Bowman, go to building 23 and take this exam," which I did. And I guess I passed because a few days later I was assigned to Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. For testing. And it took various tests, especially language aptitude tests. And I spent about a week there waiting for an assignment. It was a glorious time. There's a stage door canteen on Lafayette Square where senators' wives and Mrs. Roosevelt would sometimes come and serve meals to the soldiers in the evening. There's a great band and nice girls to dance with and so on. And I went to visit Congress and the Supreme Court. It was a lot of fun. It was a nice interlude after my basic training. Then I was sent to Lehigh University in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania for the Army Specialized Training Program. They trained engineers and they trained people for language. And and I was trained for the German Area and Language Program, intensive German language training and training in the economics and geography and culture of Germany. And since I knew German already, I spent very little time in class, so I was able to take courses at Lehigh and got another semester's credit. It was just a boondoggle. It was a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
And
Now, did you go to class in uniform?
oh yes, we were soldiers. We were all promoted to PFC,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a song at the time that said, "Take down your service flag, mother. Your son's in the ASTP." And it was just very relaxed. And in Pennsylvania, you couldn't get drinks on Sundays, so you belonged to a ski club, and where you could, it's a private club where you get buy beers and so on. So I went to the Holy Ghost Beneficial Society, which was an Irish steelworkers beer club, and they wouldn't take my dues. They wouldn't take my money for beer. It was just wonderful. They were so hospitable.
Uh-huh.
And then I had a good time there till Christmas 1943 came, and I got a 10-day furlough, Christmas furlough, to go to Swarthmore College and spend it with my old professor there and stay in his home with his family.
Mm-hmm.
I no sooner got to Swarthmore than I got a telegram telling me to report back to Lehigh, which I did, and they said, go immediately to Camp Ritchie, Maryland, Military Intelligence Training Program there. So, Christmas Day, I arrived there. Of course, they weren't expecting us, so I spent 2 weeks shoveling coal and cleaning classrooms, and so I'm waiting for my program to begin.
Uh-huh.
And I was trained then as a military intelligence interrogator prisoners of war.
Mm-hmm.
And this was a very intensive course. You had to know all more about the German army than most Germans knew. Order of battle, reading German military documents, interpreting German army maps, looking at aerial photographs and identifying German equipment and so on. And we had night compass programs. A covered truck would take us out on some wooded road. This was up in the Catoctin Mountains where Camp David is now. It's cool. There was a tent there, and then there was a German prisoner to be interrogated. Well, he was actually a German-American who spoke native German, and he had a script to follow. We'd interrogate him and then write up the interrogation report, and then we have to transmit it by Morse code, by radio to some place. Then we go to another point, and there we would find some German army documents which we had to interpret and analyze and so on.
Now, were you working with like a 3-man team?
Yes, about 3 or 4 men
Okay.
teams, yes. And so it was intensive and strenuous, and I never worked so hard. I went to 2 tough colleges, but I never studied as hard as I did there.
Mm-hmm.
But I completed the course. I was all ready to go overseas to join some division, part of an IPW team, but I was sent with 5 or 6 other guys down to Atlanta, Georgia, all of a sudden. And we were interviewed there by the G2 of the 4th Service Command Intelligence Office. And he said, I have an assignment for you, but first I want to see how good you are at intelligence work. I want here each take $10 and spend a day in Atlanta tomorrow and pretend you're German agents and pick up as much military information as you can, write up a report and come back to me the following morning. We stayed at a hotel.
Mm-hmm.
So I went into Atlanta the next morning to the USO there, and I met a soldier who had about 6 or 8 hours to wait in Atlanta before moving on to his furlough point. It turned out he was from Ascension Island in the South Atlantic, and it was a place where bombers and transport planes flying from Brazil over to Africa could stop for refueling if they needed it, or repairs and so on. He told me all about the equipment on the island, the fuel tanks, how often planes came and so on, and how at the end of the very short airfield there was a bump and the planes would rush down the field and then hit the bump and get knocked into the air. All very interesting. So I wrote up a report, and Colonel Everett was very pleased with it. So he said, "You pass." So I and two other guys were then told that we could volunteer for this job, but you'd better volunteer. And we were sent back to Camp Ritchie, and our service records were all expunged, and got new service records with new identities, and we were to play the role of disloyal American soldiers who refused to fight the Germans or the Japanese because we were pro-Nazi. And then we were sent to a place, Lebanon, Tennessee, which was the site of the old Tennessee maneuver area, which had been used by army divisions earlier in the war and they chopped up the fields and broke bridges and fences and so on. It was the job of this 1800s engineer general service battalion to repair things, and the people in this battalion were all disloyal American soldiers. They were in uniform, and they were mostly German-American Bundists and people like that. What was very strange was that these guys were in an American uniform. They had weekend passes. They got furloughs back home. They were not obliged to risk their lives at the front.
Wow.
They just were given very tough jobs working in the fields. I had a job with some other guys of dismantling an airstrip. It was made of steel plates, and it was about 95 degrees temperature, and the heat was almost unbearable. We had to knock these apart and load them on the trucks.
Now, what rank were you at that point?
We were all privates because we'd all been, whatever rank we were demoted because we were disloyal.
Yeah.
And the cadre, the NCOs and so on, were loyal American soldiers. They were in charge, and they were engineer specialists, and they told us how to use bulldozers and how to pour cement and so on, and to fix things. And my job was to see if these guys were up to anything, whether they were meeting any German agents, and become one of them. You know? And there were two other guys from Camp Ritchie. There were three companies, and I was in Company A, and the other two were in Company B and Company C. And we were not supposed to meet with one another. And I'd go into town, into Nashville with these guys, and have beers with them. And as far as I could tell, they weren't up to anything. In Nashville, I would pull away from them at one point, and I'd go to a safe house and report to an FBI agent who would debrief me on what I had learned over the previous week or two. And I did this for about 3 or 4 months, and then the three of us were recalled back to Atlanta.
Now, did you find out any information that was...
No, I did not. What I did find was some of these guys were just malingerers. They were not Nazis. They just took advantage of the situation to have a safe war. And I recommended they just put in regular units. They're not dangerous, these guys. They make them serve, and then I did that, And when I got back to Colonel Everett, he praised us all, and he said, you, Bowman, your predecessor was murdered by the guys. They find out about him. They knew that he found out that he was a plant, and they poisoned him. I said, well, thanks for telling me now.
Jeez.
And so we all got promoted. I was promoted to sergeant. I'd been a PFC and was sent down to Fort Benning, Georgia, to work in the G2 section there. But I said I wanted to get back to Camp Ritchie, so in about 2 months, the colonel arranged it, and I got back to Camp Ritchie. Whereas given a direct commission as a second lieutenant, I guess partly because of what I'd done in the South. At this point, I was given a commendation by Colonel Everett, which was basis for the Army Commendation Medal. It says here, Bowman and so on, after volunteering for this mission, beyond the call of duty and after undergoing 3.5 months of hazardous and trying conditions, accomplished his task with exceptionally outstanding success. His ability to successfully cope with adverse conditions, in addition to his loyalty, conscientious effort, and keen interest in his country, reflects great credit both on himself and the command, which was sort of exaggerating what I did there, but it was very nice. And I think that was partly responsible for my getting my commission. And then I was finally sent overseas.
Oh, why don't you hold up that one photograph as an enlisted man?
Yes.
Okay, I'm getting a little bit of glare. If try, yeah, right there is perfect. Let me just zoom in on it. Do you recall when and where that was taken?
It must have been taken after my completing basic training in
Okay.
1943.
Okay, got it.
And then I was commissioned, and here I am after the war in Europe. This time I was a first lieutenant.
Okay. Was that taken in Europe or?
Yes, it was. It was taken by a friend on camera. I just had it enlarged.
Okay.
Well, we, with a bunch of other guys from Camp Ritchie, we went to New York and boarded the Mauritania, big Cunard liner, and zigzagged across the Atlantic to Liverpool, England, uneventfully, and took a train to Southampton, and there we, at night, we boarded a small French liner, the Cuba, and crossed the channel overnight to Le Havre. And another narrow escape. 2 or 3 trips later, the Cuba was sunk by a submarine. It was a considerable loss of life. Well, I got to a military intelligence assembly center outside Paris, a place called La Vézinay. Had a couple of very nice visits in Paris.
Now, did you speak French also?
No, I did not.
Okay.
No. A few words, much. And I was then assigned to IPW team, Interrogation of Prisoner of War Team 154, and it had a history because 154 had been assigned to a division in the Battle of the Bulge, and it was captured. Team members were captured, and they were all executed by the Germans, because most of these fellows in the interrogation teams were German Americans. They were, a lot of them had come from Germany to escape Hitler, to escape the concentration camps. They were, in fact, they spoke better German than English, and they were treated as, well, they were Jews for one thing, and they were treated as traitors by the Germans. They were shot. So the whole team was wiped out. So it's funny, they kept the name. So here we were a fresh team. It was commanded by First Lieutenant Jake Berger. He was an American fellow from Brooklyn. And then there were 4 enlisted men. They were all German Americans. And we took off in 2 jeeps for Holland. We went through Belgium, met our division, 20th Armored Division, up in Maastricht, Holland, and settled there. An armored division in those days was divided into 2 combat commands, A and B. One was commanded by a brigadier and the other by a colonel. So Lieutenant Berger and 2 of the enlisted men went to Combat Command A, and I went to Combat Command B with 2 enlisted men. And we took off across Germany, across the Rhine at Remagen, down south through Nuremberg, and we saw these cities totally destroyed. Still, it was a sad sight, the smell of bodies and under the ruins, and we knew that most of them were women and old men, that the soldiers were out in the front. So it was sort of sad. And we got, in Bavaria, we got into action, and it was late in the war, and my colonel, Colonel Jones, was killed. And,
how did that come about?
there was a firefight, and he was killed by a sniper.
Mm-hmm.
And I was not far away from him, and
Were you
interrogating prisoners.
Okay.
I was never scraped.
Were you actually involved in part of the firefight, or
No,
you were just?
Not. No, I'd be huddled behind a tank talking to a prisoner.
Okay.
To find out what was happening, what unit he was now.
How cooperative were these prisoners?
Well, I'd say 1 out of 5 was cooperative, and that was enough because we had a lot of prisoners then. The army was falling apart.
Mm-hmm.
And
Now, what happened to the prisoner at
the
that point?
MPs would then take them to the rear and put them in fields which were surrounded by barbed wire, and there's sort of stockades there, and they're guarded there, and eventually take them out further elsewhere.
Okay.
And one of my sergeants was, they were all native Germans, and sometimes we get to a little village, and if the phone was still working in the railway station or something, he would call ahead. He'd say, "This is Lieutenant Schmidt of the something. What unit are you there?" And he'd call him a unit in the village ahead of us. And sometimes they would say, "Oh, this is a Captain so-and-so. We're with the 21st Grenadiers. We're here still holding on." So it got information by telephone. It was very clever of this sergeant to do this.
Uh-huh.
My German was good, but it was not native, and I could not do that.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, we got near Munich, and I'm getting to the end of the war. We hadn't had any prisoners for some time, so my S2 intelligence commander, Major Christado, said, "Bowman, why don't you go take your jeep and go up to our frontline units, to our armored infantry regiment up there further south, and see if you can find any fresh prisoners." They gotten any fresh prisoners to talk to, and I said I would, and got in the jeep, and then the CIC lieutenant, a friend of mine, also in the unit, said, "I'll ride shotgun with you." So we took off. It was middle of the night. It was sleet falling. It was, even though it was April, it was absolutely dark, and we went down this muddy road, no signposts, and we had no map. We couldn't use lights. We had a password when we met our home people. Didn't meet anybody. Went on, and gradually the road got better. It became a paved road, and then suddenly we saw there were fairly tall buildings on either side of us. And I said, "My God, we're in Munich. We'd better turn around and go home." And so we turned the jeep around just down a Mercedes sedan with red crosses on it, came rolling up, and the gentleman got out, a civilian, and he said, "Are you Americans?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, I'm from the German Red Cross, but I'm also a member of the anti-Nazi underground, and I wish you people would stop bombarding the city at random indiscriminately. I have a map here that shows where the SS units are, where the gun emplacements are, where there are tanks and so on. You can shoot at them and not at these my people in their buildings." And I said, "Well, hop on." And he said, "Where are you going?" And I said, "Well, we're in Oberpfaffenhofen," or whatever the name of the village, "but I'm lost." He said, "Well, I know the way." So he guided us back to our village, got there safely again, didn't meet any American or German troops. And our new colonel was delighted and sent him up to division headquarters with an escort. And,
Now, did he have his vehicle too, or he just left it?
We left it there, yeah. And evidently this was pretty good information, because a couple of weeks after the war, I was out with Lieutenant Bay, my CIC pal, rounding up Germans, Nazis in the automatic arrest category. And I came home at night with Lieutenant Bowman, and the colonel said, "Where you been?" I said, "Well, I've been working, sir." "Well, the general was here, and he wanted to hang a medal on both of you. And he was there with photographers, and you missed it, so here's your medal." And he went back to sit down at the table to have his dinner. And so this is very overblown, perhaps, but this is the citation. They got the Bronze Star, both of us, for meritorious service in support of military operations from 20 April to 4 May 45. As IPW officer for Headquarters Combat Command B, Lieutenant Bowman's initiative and cleverness were instrumental in obtaining much information of material value to his headquarters. On 30 April, during the Battle of Munich, Lieutenant Bowman and another officer proceeded beyond the front lines and sought out information concerning the enemy defenses of the city. By his actions, he materially aided in the destruction of the city's defenses. It's sort of an exaggeration, but it was all a mistake. We just got lost.
Now, were you aware of the concentration camps?
Yes, after Munich, we went on, and our division liberated Dachau concentration camp. I saw the gas chambers and the crematoria, bodies lying around, and the half-dead prisoners wandering around. And I stayed away. I looked in and I left because the medics and the quartermaster people were going there to feed them and treat them and so on. I didn't want to get in their way. So we rounded up some German civilians from Dachau city and brought them to the camp and made them dig pits to bury the dead, and so they could have a sight of what really went on there. Yeah, and just about that time the war ended.
Now, did you ever hear any stories of atrocities like, well, Americans being executed or German prisoners being executed at all, or anything?
Well, you know, I was going to interrogate some of the guards at Dachau, but they were shot before I could get to them. Yes. And others ran away and escaped. Yeah. And as we approached Munich, I came upon a convoy of 2 or 3 trucks, and abandoned by the side of the road, German Wehrmacht trucks, and I inspected them and found out that they were from the small concentration camp called Gross Rosen concentration camp. And there were bag after bag, cloth bags of gold teeth.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And then jewelry, rings, wedding rings, and bracelets and so on, all taken from concentration camp prisoners. Yeah. And I talked to prisoners, the more able-bodied ones from Dachau. I had chatted with them, and one guy was quite able-bodied and still all right. I took him to our place where we were living, and we had commandeered a villa. We gave him a good meal, we gave him a good bed, and spent much of the evening talking to him about his experience. So I got first-hand account there. Yeah.
Now, going back a little bit, do you recall where you were and what your reaction was when you heard about the death of President Roosevelt?
Not really. We heard about it actually by, they issued Stars and Stripes paper, and they got right to the front. And I don't know where they put them out, but very quickly we'd get papers distributed to us. And I have one here. That's how I heard about it. And their reaction was a little shock. And who was this fellow Truman? We'd never heard of him. And this is the issue of the Stars and Stripes the day the war ended in Europe.
Oh, okay. Let me just zoom in on the date.
European Theater of Operations,
Right.
ETO.
Okay. Was there much celebration?
Yes, we got drunk. Among other things, in this convoy of trucks from this concentration camps, there were cases of fine French cognac and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And I confiscated that and passed it around, and so we had ample
Mm-hmm.
stuff to imbibe. And then after the war ended, we went down to, the hostilities ended, we went down into Austria ways. We were going to go down to Trieste, Italy, to keep Tito's forces from taking over the city.
Mm-hmm.
But another division from northern Italy got there ahead of us, so we didn't. We went back to Bavaria, and then the 20th Army packed up to go to Japan. And they only got as far as Antwerp when the war ended in the Pacific. And I, by this time, was transferred to the 3rd Army Intelligence Center at Freising near Munich, where we interrogated important Nazi people. And after that, I went on to a place near Frankfurt called Oberursel, where there's a major interrogation center.
Mm-hmm. Any really important Nazis that you were involved with?
People. Yeah, there was a Hitler's dentist, for instance. That's important. We never found his body. We had Hitler's secretary who had an account of the last days in the bunker.
Mm-hmm.
And a very interesting woman I talked to named Hannah Reich.
Oh, yes.
She was the Amelia Earhart of Germany, a very fine aviatrix, and she was a test pilot for the Messerschmitt jet plane, which fortunately, the jet fighter, which fortunately was not developed in time to do anything good in the war.
Now, were those people cooperative, or?
Yes, they were, yeah. And Hannah Reich, her boyfriend was a Luftwaffe general called Ritter von Epp. Ritter von Grime, and he got orders. He was stationed in just near Munich, and he got orders by radio from Hitler's bunker to report there to get his commission to take over the Luftwaffe, because Goering had been a traitor according to Hitler, and he was dismissed from the job as being chief of the Luftwaffe. So she got into a little liaison plane, and she flew her boyfriend all the way from Munich to Berlin, stopping in farmers' fields to pick up fuel from farmers' trucks, and made it, landed in the street outside the bunker in this little plane under heavy Soviet fire, and got the guy into the bunker. He got orders from Hitler to become head of the Air Force, and the next day got him out again, flew him back to Munich, whereupon he and she just took off for the Alps. The war was over, and he said, what are we doing? And so I talked to her. It's an interesting woman.
Was he captured too?
No, he committed suicide.
Oh,
He
okay.
captured, no. And then there was a couple of very outstanding German armored division commanders, one from the Panzer Division, and I can't remember his name right now, but we said, okay, we finished the interrogation, you weren't a war criminal, go home. He said, I have no home. Well, I lived in Hamburg, and it's gone. Can you give me a job? So we put him in charge of the motor pool. He was an expert mechanic, and that was a nice ending there. And then I stayed on until July or August of '46. I was enjoying my work there. And then I and then two other officers were put in charge of a document shipment, the German classified documents which the Pentagon wanted to read. And so we, instead of having to go back on the troop ship, we went up to Antwerp and got them loaded on the Belgian freighter. We had a nice leisurely trip across the Atlantic all by ourselves with this in this comfortable Liberty ship to Hoboken. That's where we ended the war.
Now, what rank were you when you were discharged?
First lieutenant.
Okay.
I just wanted to make a boast at the end. 5 generations of Bowmans have been in the military service. My grandfather, who came from Clyde, New York, a little village between Rochester and Syracuse on the Bulge Canal, he joined the Union Army, and he marched with Sherman from Atlanta to the sea with the 28th Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
And then when he got to the sea, he got tired of walking, so he joined the 11th New York Cavalry. Spent the rest of the war with that. Then my father served in World War I on the Western Front. He won the French Croix de Guerre. And then I served in World War II. And then my 2 elder sons served in forces during the Vietnam War. One was in the Air Force. He never got to Vietnam. He served in England, Spain, Turkey, and Iran. The other son joined the 82nd Airborne, but he served in Germany and Panama.
Mm-hmm.
And then my grandson enlisted in the Marines and saw service in Somalia. That's 5 generations.
Okay. Nice.
I'm pretty proud of that.
Now, once you left the service, did you make use of the GI Bill?
Yes, I did. I went back to Swarthmore and I got my degree. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
I did. Yes. Yeah.
Did you join any veterans organizations?
No, I didn't. I went overseas quite soon after that. With my military intelligence training, I was snapped up by the Central Intelligence Agency, as was my wife later. And I went overseas and spent most of my career in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And that was it.
Did you retire from them?
Yeah, I did, yes, after 38 years of service.
Oh, really? Okay.
And my wife retired too after 25 years. We met overseas.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose I better not ask you about your career with them.
No, I just served in interesting places. I just,
Mm-hmm.
it was very enjoyable. I was in Switzerland, Germany, Greece, Austria, and made the most of it. Mountain climbing, skiing in Switzerland, and the opera in Vienna.
Mm-hmm.
In Bonn, my office was on the Rhine. I'd look out the window and watch the boats going up and down the Rhine. It was very pleasant. I was in Berlin when the wall was still up, and it was sort of claustrophobic, but it was an interesting city.
Mm-hmm. Now, did you go to Vietnam at all?
No, I didn't. No,
Okay.
no. I was fortunate. I never asked, so I didn't go.
Did you attend any reunions or keep in touch with anyone you were in this service with?
Well, just casual friends.
Mm-hmm.
A number of people in the agency had been in the military intelligence with me, and I knew them, yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Okay.
it's just casual. I didn't join any organization. No.
Okay. How do you think your time in the service changed or affected your life? Obviously, it had a great effect on it.
Well, it made a man out of me, I guess, because I was rather fragile, and I got into this awful engineer battalion, and I had to work pick and shovel work, and it built me up over those 4 or 5 months. That was very good for me.
Mm-hmm.
Basic training was good for me, and I learned to deal with people, and it was a fine experience. I had, as the British say, I had a good war.
Okay. All right. Is there anything else?
I think that's it.
Okay.
Thank you for
Oh, my pleasure. Did you want to show me some photos in the...
Yeah, but that's not for the camera.
Okay.
It's too small.
All right. Well, thank you again for your interview.
Okay.